In Nocturnal Animals, director Tom Ford crafts a layered, intricate tale of love, loss, and revenge. Beneath the surface of its glossy, haunting visuals lies a web of metaphors that bridge the divide between Susan's reality, Edward's written world, and their shared past. This video essay will unpack the film's metaphors and uncover the meaning behind its three interwoven narratives: the present, the flashbacks, and Edward's novel. The story begins with Susan Morrow, a wealthy art gallery owner, trapped in an unfulfilling life with her husband, Hutton. Her polished exterior masks deep dissatisfaction and regret, especially as she receives an unexpected manuscript from her ex-husband, Edward Sheffield. The novel, titled Nocturnal Animals, becomes a painful reminder of their shared history and an allegorical confrontation of their failed relationship. Edward's novel mirrors their lives with startling precision. The fictional Tony Hastings, played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the film within a film, represents Edward himself. His wife and daughter, Laura and India Hastings, serve as stand-ins for Susan and the child they never had, lost to Susan's abortion. The novel's events begin with horror. A serene family road trip quickly devolves into a nightmarish encounter with a gang led by the sadistic Ray Marcus. This gang represents the dark forces in Susan's life, the betrayal and heartbreak she inflicted on Edward. Turk's manipulation echoes the setup of her affair with Hutton. Lou symbolizes the secrecy of their infidelity, and Ray's brutality parallels the ultimate cruelty of Susan's choice, terminating their pregnancy. Tony's inability to protect his family mirrors Edward's inability to stop Susan from leaving him. The novel is a brutal reflection of Edward's trauma, yet it is also an act of catharsis. By writing this story, he processes the pain of their shared past while delivering a veiled message to Susan, a message she cannot ignore. In the opening of the novel's narrative, we see Edward channeling his anguish into Tony's helplessness. But the story's progression hints at something more than sorrow. It's about reclamation, justice, and revenge. Detective Bobby Andes is introduced as Tony's ally. But who is Bobby in this grand metaphor? Detective Bobby Andes, a gritty and relentless lawman played by Michael Shannon. Andes' arrival shifts the tone of Edward's novel, introducing a character who stands as both ally and a symbol of Edward's suppressed desire for justice. Andes is the part of Edward that still fights for resolution, a piece of him that refuses to let go of the pain Susan caused. Andes is crucial in driving Tony forward, just as Edward uses the novel to force Susan into reflecting on her past. Bobby's deteriorating health, he's terminally ill, adds a layer of urgency to their quest for justice. His illness parallels Edward's emotional toll, the part of him that still cares about the betrayal, but is slowly fading. What makes Andes so compelling is that he's both practical and ruthless. His methods, while effective, are morally ambiguous. He's willing to bend the rules to achieve justice. This reflects Edward's transformation. He's no longer the idealistic, sensitive man Susan left behind. Through Andes, we see the darker, colder side of Edward emerge, one willing to exact revenge by any means necessary. As Tony and Andes close in on Ray Marcus, the lines between justice and vengeance blur. For Tony, this journey isn't just about avenging his family. It's about confronting his own failures, his inability to protect them. Similarly, Edward is confronting the deeper wounds Susan inflicted, her betrayal, her dismissal of his dreams, and her decision to end their unborn child's life. Meanwhile, Susan begins to piece together the metaphorical weight of Edward's story. Every act of brutality in the novel mirrors a chapter of their failed relationship. Detective Andes embodies Edward's determination to seek closure, and Tony's final confrontation with Ray Marcus will mark the ultimate reckoning. But as Tony's journey unfolds, Susan realizes that Edward's story isn't just about retribution. It's a declaration of independence. By the end of this narrative, both Edward and Tony will have achieved closure, but at great personal cost. The climax of Nocturnal Animals hinges on Tony Hastings' confrontation with Ray Marcus, the man responsible for destroying his family. This scene is not only the apex of Edward's novel, but also the symbolic culmination of his emotional turmoil with Susan. Ray represents all the pain, betrayal, and loss that Edward endured. Throughout the story, Ray Marcus has been more than just a violent antagonist. He embodies the ugliness of Susan's betrayal, the casual cruelty, the disregard for consequence, and the powerlessness Edward felt as their marriage disintegrated. Aaron Taylor Johnson's portrayal of Ray is chillingly ordinary, making his cruelty even more unsettling. In this moment, Susan must grapple with the truth. Ray's demise in the novel isn't just about Tony avenging his family. It's Edward's way of symbolically erasing the chapter of his life where Susan controlled the narrative. By defeating Ray, Edward reclaims his power, but Tony's victory comes at a devastating cost. In the novel, Tony is mortally wounded after killing Ray. This mirrors Edward's transformation in the real world. By confronting the pain of his past, Edward has irrevocably changed. The man Susan knew, the sensitive, hopeful writer, is gone. Edward's choice to kill Tony in the novel is a deeply symbolic act. It signifies the death of his former self, the man who once lived to keep things alive, even if they were bound to die. Edward has moved on, but not without losing a part of himself in the process. For Susan, Tony's death signifies something far more personal. She begins to understand that Edward's novel isn't just a story, it's a declaration that he no longer needs her validation. This realization hits hardest during the final scenes of the film, as Susan waits for Edward at the restaurant. Her excitement and anticipation turn to humiliation and despair when he doesn't show up. This too is Edward's revenge. By refusing to meet her, he delivers the final blow, leaving her to confront the emptiness of her choices. The novel has served its purpose. Edward has exorcised his demons, and Susan is left to face the consequences of her actions. The tragedy of Nocturnal Animals lies in its exploration of how love, betrayal, and loss shape us, and how moving on often requires leaving pieces of ourselves behind. Tom Ford's Nocturnal Animals is not just a story about betrayal and revenge, it's a visual and narrative masterpiece. Every frame is meticulously crafted to immerse the viewer in a world where meaning is layered and metaphors abound. Let's unpack how Ford's direction elevates this story into a cinematic tour de force. The film opens with Susan's art exhibit, a deliberate, shocking introduction. The surreal imagery of larger-than-life, unabashed performers contrasts with Susan's cold, controlled world. This stark dichotomy sets the tone, highlighting the emptiness behind Susan's seemingly perfect life. Her art mirrors her own existence, bold on the surface, but hollow beneath. Ford uses light and shadow to symbolize Susan's inner conflict. Notice how her surroundings often feel dim and muted, reflecting her growing realization of what she's lost. By contrast, Edward's novel bursts with the harsh brightness of the desert, symbolizing the raw, unfiltered emotions she's tried to suppress. The desert setting in Edward's novel isn't just a backdrop, it's a metaphor for emotional desolation. It represents Edward's journey through grief and loss, as well as Susan's isolation in her present life. The harshness of the environment mirrors the brutality of the choices they've both made. Flashbacks in Nocturnal Animals are another layer of Ford's storytelling brilliance. They're not mere recollections, but carefully curated fragments of Susan's memory. These scenes are bathed in warmth and light, contrasting starkly with her current life. They remind us that her happiness wasn't taken from her. It was something she gave away. The parallels between the novel and Susan's life are reinforced by Ford's deliberate use of mirroring. Tony's ultimate sacrifice and Edward's decision to reject Susan both leave her alone, forced to confront the emptiness of her choices. These moments of reflection make us question, is revenge ever truly satisfying, or does it simply perpetuate the cycle of loss? Even Susan's environment is loaded with symbolism. Her opulent home, with its sharp angles and sterile design, feels more like a museum than a place of comfort. It's a physical representation of her emotional state, beautiful but devoid of life. Ford's use of stillness in the final scene is masterful. By holding the camera on Susan's face, he forces us to sit with her pain. This moment of stillness contrasts sharply with the chaotic energy of the novel, driving home the permanence of her isolation. Ultimately, Nocturnal Animals is a story of choices and consequences. Through Ford's masterful use of visuals, narrative structure, and symbolism, we're invited to delve into the complexities of human emotion. The film challenges us to reflect on our own lives, asking, What are we willing to sacrifice for success? And at what cost? Tom Ford's Nocturnal Animals reminds us that some wounds never heal, but through art, we can confront the pain, process it, and perhaps, finally, let it go.